have a couple of people here that we wanted to invite to ask a couple of questions too, just to bring us home. They'll do a quick introduction of themselves in a second as well, but we wanted to get several different perspectives as to like what they look at from towards observability for themselves or for the customers that they work with. And we'll spend about 30 minutes on that. And as they rightfully said themselves, they are the final session between us and beer. So we're going to do great to meet that bar and exceed it. So what I want to ask first is each of the panelists to just introduce themselves, name, role, and just a little bit about your company. So we'll start with you.
Yes, thank you. My name is Gaute Holmin. I'm a product offering manager in Sopra Steria, large consultancy company. I used to be an observability consultant for many years, long before it was called Observability. But the recent year, I've been the product manager for monitoring and observability in our MSP space.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is MacLeod. I'm the VP of software at a company called Dexory. We're a UK-based startup that build an autonomous system that does inventory in warehouses, so it's sort of like a robot. We come and install it in your warehouse, and then it takes a photograph of everything in the warehouse every day and sends it back to our system, and we have those deployed across Europe and the US market.
Last but not least, my name is Marc Lang. I'm part of the Google Cloud team in Denmark. I'm a custom engineer focused on infrastructure. I have a couple of decades doing what they now is called observability, so I'm trying to put some insights onto that.
Awesome. Thank you. So maybe to start with the first question, why is observability important to your business, or why is it important to your customers?
If I'm going to look at it from an MSP perspective, most of our customers are quite basic. They want to know if their applications are up and available, which they surprisingly often don't know. Besides that, I think it's important to look at the business side and see what is important for the management, to see if what value does our applications give us when they're up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think observability is important to more than just the tech guys. It's important to the business side as well. They don't know it yet, but they should.
Exactly. Good.
For us, the tech guys, we are dependent on actually observing what happens out there. So we have a very, very complex platform that's rolled out internationally. So what we rely on is just understanding what's going on under the hood on that. And that's both stuff that's happening out there with our platform in real time, but also understanding where changes are happening to that allow us to perform preventative maintenance. So it's a bit different from what we're maybe looking at with monitoring, say, web services or something like that, but we're monitoring changes in hardware, changes in the environment as well. And so key for that is to allow us to scale rapidly by just understanding when changes are happening and being able to get out there to customer sites before we see something like a downtime or some kind of hardware damage that is going to impact on our ability to deliver service to customers. So it's important both for us from a business perspective, but also for customers as well, just being able to actually provide that service to them on a regular basis.
Yeah, and well, Google Cloud is primarily the customers, right? So they want to know how much time they're down, same as Scott mentioned. So it's the same putting stuff available, talking about what makes sense from an observability perspective. If it's built-in tool sets or Grafana, other aspects that can be used, third-party tools. Talking a lot about multi-cloud platforms, hybrid setups. So capturing your application the right way. I think we've had a good piece of sessions here and actually focus on getting it right, and it's very difficult. So we try to assist as from an easy and simple point as possible, and putting that towards the customer.
Awesome. Okay, good. Matt, maybe to start with you then for the second question. What challenges do you often hear from customers or internal or external? Like, what type of challenge do you typically hear?
I mean, for us, the biggest challenge for me is that our servers drive themselves around and most other people's don't. So what we find is we have connectivity challenges. We have lots of different hardware versions out there in the field as well. So, we may find that we have, every single robot that gets deployed is custom in some way for that environment. So for us, we are making sure that we can gather a consistent set of data from all these things that we can't necessarily upgrade by just pushing out a software release to them. making sure that we can connect with these devices that are deployed in the field and get regular updates from them. And also just generally the volume of data that we need to gather as well. We need quite high resolution metrics to monitor things like power consumption or, like performance of motors and actuators. So for us, the challenge is how do we take those models that are quite well studied in maybe web services or other applications and apply them to the sort of like detailed data that we need to get from the fleet.
Yeah, and from our perspective is just making sure that customers actually can get the most out of the cloud without actually putting too much effort in there from our operational perspective. So ease of use and integrations and collecting as much usable data as possible. Internally, we have even more metrics than we actually use for good and bad. Dissecting what's relevant is one of the principles we use in the SRE practice internally as well. So the SLO and SLIs that you talk about here, they need to be pretty aligned with what is the user journeys and the experiences on the outside. And that's also echoed down into the customer aspect.
Yeah, many of our MSP customers have big challenges in having, they don't have the new cool container-based applications. They have old silo-based C++ Oracle applications that they really don't know how to monitor them. They don't know how to make sure it's, how do we monitor if it's up or down. So that's many of our customers' biggest challenges.
Okay, cool. And maybe one question for you specifically: how do you help customers? We spoke quite a bit about it today, but how do you help them on their journey?
Yeah, we do something when we take on new MSP customers. We do something we call a service decomposition, where we interview them and find out where are the endpoints in all these old applications that we can monitor to make sure that we know the application is up. So we create incidents when this thing is happening. Everything else is just trends and stuff we can use to kind of troubleshoot. But we do a service decomposition where we mainly draw a drawing of the application and find out just where do we put the needle. Yeah.
Okay. Nice. And then maybe for Marc, let's start with you. How are you, or the question is double. So on the one hand, how are you organized around observability, or how the organization of your customers, right?
Also, our concepts are based on SLO, so service level objectives, and then we drill down from there. Based on the SRE principles, that's kind of the narrative we want to put out. So it made easy to actually utilize the metrics we have available and put it towards error budgets and be getting like a visible aspect all the way to business that, okay, this has an impact X, Y, Z. Now we can do certain updates depending on the applications and so on. So we really try to highlight that, well, our own practices we use internally is the same tool sets we add outside. And OpenTelemetry is a big part of that. Yeah. So Novo, people nodding. Yeah. So we're trying to do all the practices and all the stuff we're advocating, and that echoes all the way out into the front line.
I'm happy to.
Yeah, let's do this.
I think for us, we are obviously a much earlier stage than Google. So our challenges around organization are much more about how do we get access to that platform as quickly as possible to an organization that's scaling rapidly. So thinking about what Pierre was talking about earlier, we're quite federal already in the sense that we do have a central platform. We use Grafana Cloud and everyone is on board with that. But individual teams are still really responsible for their journey into that system, like how they're building their individual contributions into the platform, how they're building their dashboards. So there's not really sort of like a central operation for us yet. So we do enforce a culture of metrics from the get-go. And we encourage and empower people to add metrics into that platform as much as they can. So for us, it's really about just making sure that we can open that pathway into getting metrics until we get to a level where maybe we can centralize that strategy a little bit more. But really, just now it's focused around scalability.
Yeah, I think I'll use an example where I was hired as an observability consultant, where we were developing this SaaS solution for tens of thousands of users. Where we appointed an observability champion per development team, and we put them in an observability squad. That after every sprint, we looked at the observability dashboards and looked at all the traces, looked for exceptions, long response times, and focused on them, and and prioritized what to fix. And then we deployed this application to what we called Wave 0, which was a small group of users. And then we did the whole thing again, where we looked at all the traces and all the metrics. And then we did this every week during the sprints, where the observability champions got together, looked at this, prioritized, and moved it to the developers.
Okay. And then maybe to say with you, like, how does your view on the journey to cloud relate to observability?
Well, the journey to cloud makes things even more complicated, I think. So observability is very important. It's important to ensure that we have the metrics in place before we move, so we know what to measure when we move.
Okay.
Yep.
I mean, definitely from our side, you know, we have a huge number of edge devices, which is quite a different proposition from some of the cloud implementations that we might otherwise see. So for us, it's about how do we start treating like a fleet of distributed devices as something like a distributed cloud, you know, kind of taking a lot of those lessons from cloud observability and then applying them across a fleet of devices that are distributed. So, you know, it's trying to make sure that we have things like a similar posture for collecting metrics and logs from both the relatively small number of cloud services that we do have, and taking those lessons and applying them to a fleet of hardware devices as well. So kind of trying to have a nice uniform platform between them.
Mark, if you can also include a little bit about how then GCP would help on this journey, that would be interesting to also hear.
Yeah, so from the cloud journey aspect, I already discussed the multi and hybrid cloud solutions. So looking at a broader aspect of vendors rather than just one. So we have a subset that makes it readily available to get metrics and create your own customized ones depending on the user journeys and the aspects you have in that. And if you have metrics readily available, you need to use them. But we also work a lot with third-party vendors to do something on that, and we actually have a majority, specifically in Denmark, using Azure DevOps as their base. So we try to integrate as much as possible and assist on how can we make this readily available. So yeah, there are a lot of tie-ins all the way around, but generally I would say we try to understand the scope and assist as much as possible to give it relevance, rather than being stuck in, well, you're not using GCP, then well, you are on your own, right?
Yeah.
So we try to do the multi-cloud aspect on that part.
Awesome. Okay, really cool. Maybe moving a little bit more to the organizational side, I think that was also a topic quite often discussed today. So when you look at your customers that you work with, how are they typically organized around observability?
I think most of them typically aren't. So we try to help them. We have organized ourselves in different product organizations. So my group is called the Right Control. So we basically try to help the customers by offering them different levels of observability, where we can help them with the tools and the processes.
Okay. For you?
I mean, our whole job is ultimately observability, but in the physical space instead of the digital space. So like we call that internally the observability gap, you know, that the customers have between data that comes in and data that goes out the other side. So, you know, we're pretty familiar with that from the logistics industry perspective, and a lot of the stuff that was being mentioned earlier about DFDS, you know, is a challenge for customers just in the practical space as well as the observability of their data systems. So, you know, we not only try to solve that for them, but to provide exposure about what we're doing to help them with that. So a lot of the product that we offer is both this kind of like version of physical observability and then the sort of information that goes along with it. How often are we running through their warehouses? How are we collecting data? How are their systems working? And how, you know, ultimately the goal for us is to provide insight into how accurate their systems are at representing the state of the environments that they have. And so what we want to do is expose as much data as we can to them to make what we're doing observable as well.
Yeah, and I think I can go quote on this one, that maturity is sparse on a lot of these topics. So a lot of very few have a lot of experience and a lot of focus on that, and a whole other aspect is that they want to be educated on, okay, what's the best practice? What do we do here? Actually learn from how we've done things and put that into the aspect of their organization. And I think Pierre alluded a bit to this as well. Like people and culture is a big part of this, and having common understanding, or at least accept to disagree on some aspects, and create the observability platform that you need. So you will start at some point, and then you will mature. And depending on where your organization are, then kind of embrace it and then move on with it.
Cool. Matt, maybe one specific question for you. What were important criteria that you looked at or look at when you look at it in terms of choosing tools, platforms, and partners?
Definitely openness for us and flexibility in terms of what we can do with it. So just being, I'd say both the openness, the stuff like open telemetry is really helpful for us because it lets a team that isn't going to have a lot of coordination at our stage of a scale up know how they're going to send metrics into a platform. It reduces the overhead and burden for us, but also just giving us flexibility in terms of being able to switch to other platforms for telemetry if we need to do that, or if we need to work with other partners as well. And secondly, on that, just being able to deploy to lots of different cloud systems. So we will have a variety of customers that, Google is not going to allow us to host data in AWS for them, and they're not going to allow our telemetry to be in there. So we need to make sure that whatever solution that we have is going to work across multi-cloud environments as well.
Awesome. Okay. Final question for the three of you. So if you have one recommendation for people in the room embarking on their observability journey, what would it be?
Organize. As simple as that.
Whatever, I will echo what we just heard. However much data you think you've got, you've probably got roughly 4 to 10 times as much as that. And yeah, probably 50% of it is never going to be touched.
Don't just buy a big full stack observability suite. Start small with some metrics that toggle the interest of everybody from development to management, and build small MVP dashboards that trigger their interest.
Okay. In that case, I might have one more question. I think we went through this one relatively quick compared to the other ones. That's more future looking then, right? If we look at the next developments in terms of like vision for observability, this can be for your customers, you or generically. What do you see there, and how do you think that will impact the business?
Yeah, I think we need to build more observability that gives value to the business side, so that they get interest in investing in observability. I've had quite big success at a couple of projects where we built dashboards for the CIO based on monitoring data. So I think that's important.
Cool, nice.
Yeah, we actually see a really similar challenge for that. So, we go through quite a lot of maybe due diligence processes, questions from investors and questions from customers. And what the business wants is a strategic answer to things like operational lifetimes for devices. How often are they out there? What is the return on investment that customers are seeing? So giving them the ability to, kind of create their own observability dashboards for that sort of information is kind of like one of our key things as well.
Yeah, I think I'll echo some of this, and also I see the future of this open telemetry eBPF. It looks amazing. I'm really looking forward to see what's going to come out of that. So yeah, I think that's the focus, that trying to be as transparent as possible and use the tool sets that's relevant, but anchored in business.
Exactly. Awesome. Are there any questions from the audience for the panel? And I can start running the mic around. There must be we have 3 people here. There we go. Oh, that's nice. I got a runner for myself now. Took the whole session. Sorry,
Joep. Could you maybe talk a little bit about manual instrumentation of code versus auto instrumentation? Where do you see benefits? What do you see being used?
I've seen that I'm still talking about the business side, but I see that manual instrumentation of code can be very useful to build stuff for the business. You can't get that automatically. You need to make the developers put in the right metrics in the code.
I would also say that probably 90% of the junk metrics that I have are the automatically generated ones. So while they may seem useful on the surface, and I am absolutely certain that for some applications they are, where you're looking to shave off very small amounts and you're very concentrated on performance, for us they end up being noise almost, and we end up spending money to process and look at them.
Internally, we use a lot of manual instrumentation. So like automated metrics doesn't really cut for us on a lot of aspects. From a customer perspective, it seems to be the same thing, that they need to generate some kind of metric out of a log aspect. Jan alluded to this 70% CPU usage and so on in logs, simplifying some of that aspect so you don't have to like save a lot of logs and pay for that amount of data, simplifying a lot of the structure and then what actually you need to save. So yeah, manual instrumentation in code really makes sense because you can simplify the general infrastructure and optimize your costs.
Any other questions? Yeah, cool.
You mentioned, Gaute, that you formed a squad of observability enthusiasts, right? So I'm curious about how who has been driving the probably the proposal and the forming the culture around this. Is that something from the management, or do you have any sort of culture embedded in the company? I'm just curious. Sometimes like you feel there is business resistance or some sort of this kind of initiative,
Yeah, I had this idea of the observability squad, and I think I spent almost a year convincing management that this was something they needed to invest in and let the observability enthusiasts or champions, as we call them, let them spend time on this. So yeah, I needed to go through management and force it through. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions for our panel? Going once, twice. Big thank you to you all, panel. Thank you.